What is time? We cannot see it, we cannot touch it, we cannot taste it or smell it. It has no weight, no mass, no color, and yet it is the ocean in which we all swim. It is the invisible river that carries us relentlessly from the moment of our first breath to the moment of our last. We try to measure it, we try to save it, we try to manage it, we even say we try to kill it. But time remains indifferent to us. It flows on, silent and absolute. Tonight, we are going to stop fighting the current. We are going to lay back, close our eyes, and float upon this river. We are going to journey back to the very beginning of human awareness, to find the source of this river, back to a time before there were seconds, or minutes, or hours, back to a time when the world did not tick, it breathed. Imagine a world without clocks. It is a difficult thing to do. Our modern lives are ruled by the tyranny of the digital display, the alarm, the schedule. We are sliced and diced into precise, millisecond increments. But strip that away. Strip away the watch on your wrist, the phone in your pocket, the calendar on your wall. What remains? Silence? Chaos? No. What remains is a rhythm, a deep, slow, powerful heartbeat, the heartbeat of the universe itself. For the first human beings, wandering the vast savannas of Africa or huddling in the caves of Europe, time was not a number. It was a feeling. It was the feeling of the sun warming the skin, signaling safety and activity. It was the feeling of the cold creeping into the air, signaling the approach of darkness and danger. It was the rhythm of the body, the beat of the heart, the rise and fall of the chest, the growl of hunger in the belly, the heaviness of eyelids. Internal time and external time. Before we built machines to tell us the time, we were the clocks. We lived in perfect synchronization with the turning of the earth. We did not watch time pass. We lived inside it. Let us try to reclaim that feeling tonight, the feeling of being connected to the great, slow cycles of the cosmos. This is the story of time. The first clock was not a machine. It was a god. It was the Sunday. For our ancient ancestors, the sun was the single most dominant force in their existence. It was the giver of life, the banisher of demons, the bringer of sight, and it was also the first measure. Imagine standing on the banks of the Nile 5,000 years ago in the land of Egypt. The landscape is vast, flat, and golden. The sky is a piercing, cloudless blue, and every morning a miracle occurs. In the east, the horizon begins to bleed fire. The god Ra, in his solar bark, rises from the underworld. He begins his journey across the arch of the heavens. This journey was the definition of a day. It was not 24 hours. It was simply the time of light. The Egyptians, obsessed with order and eternity, were the first to try and capture the movement of this god. They wanted to bring the order of the sky down to the earth. They built the obelisks. Picture one of these needles of stone, carved from a single colossal block of red granite, quarried far to the south in Aswan. It stands perfectly straight, pointing like a finger towards the zenith. Its tip is sheathed in electrum, a mixture of gold and silver, designed to catch the first and last rays of the sun. But look down at the base of the obelisk. On the white sand, the stone casts a long, sharp shadow. As Ra moves across the sky, the shadow moves across the sand. In the morning, the shadow is long and points west. As the sun climbs, the shadow shrinks, retreating towards the stone base. At noon, when the sun is at its highest, the shadow is shortest, crouching like a servant at the foot of its master. And, as the afternoon wears on, the shadow lengthens again, stretching out towards the east, reaching for the coming night. The Egyptians watched this shadow. They marked its progress. They learned that by placing stones or marks on the ground, they could divide the daylight into parts. This was the first shadow clock, the first sundial. It was a device of profound simplicity. It required no moving parts, no fuel, no winding. It ran on the geometry of the solar system. But it had a poetic quality that our modern clocks lack. A sundial does not tick. It does not chop time into discrete, noisy bits. The movement of the shadow is continuous. It is silent. It is a smooth, unbroken flow. To watch a shadow creep across the sand is to watch the rotation of the planet itself. It is to see the physics of the universe rendered in light and dark. It taught humanity a fundamental lesson. Time is movement. As long as the sun moves, time flows. But what happens when the sun stops? What happens when the god descends into the western horizon and the world is plunged into the kingdom of night? When the sun vanished, the first clock disappeared, but another, more complex clock emerged: the night sky. To the modern eye, polluted by city lights, the night sky is a black void sprinkled with a few faint dots. But to the ancients, in the deep, unpolluted dark of the desert or the ocean, the night sky was a blazing canopy of overwhelming complexity. It was a ceiling of diamonds, a scroll written in light, and it was moving. In the ziggurats of Babylon, rising like artificial mountains from the plains of Mesopotamia, there sat a special class of priests, the Watchers. Night after night, for centuries, they sat on the high terraces, their eyes turned upwards. They did not sleep. Their duty was to observe the cosmic dance. They noticed that the stars were not fixed. They marched. The entire dome of the heavens rotated, slowly and majestically, pivoting around a single, unmoving point in the north. They saw that certain patterns of stars, constellations, would rise in the east at specific times of the night, traverse the sky, and set in the west. They realized that the night could be measured not by a shadow, but by the procession of these stellar deities. They identified 36 special stars, or groups of stars, called decans. As the night progressed, a new decan would rise above the horizon. Roughly every 40 minutes, a new star would appear, marking a new stage of the night. The bull has risen, a priest might whisper. Then later, the twins have risen, and then the lion. The night was not a single block of darkness. It was a sequence of arrivals, a celestial parade. But the stars told a longer story than just the passing of a single night. They told the story of the year. The ancients noticed that the stars which appeared just before dawn changed with the seasons. In Egypt, the most important star of all was Sirius, the dog star, the brightest star in the sky. For months, it would be invisible, hidden by the glare of the sun. But then, on one specific morning in midsummer, just before the sun rose, Sirius would twinkle briefly on the eastern horizon. This event, the heliacal rising of Sirius, was a moment of immense power because it coincided, almost exactly, with the most important event in the Egyptian world, the flooding of the Nile. When Sirius appeared, the waters would rise. The dry, dead land would be inundated with life-giving silt. The agricultural cycle would begin again. The star was not just a light, it was a signal. It was a cosmic alarm clock set to ring once a year. By watching the stars, humanity learned to predict the future. We learned that time was not just a straight line, but a circle, a great, repeating wheel of seasons, of planting and harvest, of flood and drought. We learned to trust in the return, to trust that the winter would end, that the stars would wheel back to their places. That time was a cycle. But trust is a fragile thing. In the cold, misty lands of northern Europe, far from the reliable sun of Egypt, the cycle of the seasons felt more like a battle. Here, the winter was long, dark, and brutal. The sun became weak and pale. The days grew shorter and shorter, the nights longer and deeper. The green world died. For the Neolithic people of Britain, 5,000 years ago, there was a terrifying question. What if the sun keeps getting weaker? What if it sinks below the horizon and never comes back? To fight this fear, to ensure the return of the light, they built a machine made of stone. Stonehenge. Imagine the effort, without wheels, without pulleys, using only ropes, antler picks, and muscle. They dragged colossal sarsen stones, weighing 20 tons or more, across 20 miles of rolling plain. They brought the smaller blue stones from mountains in Wales, over 150 miles away. Why? Why expend such colossal energy? Because they needed to catch the sun. They arranged these stones in a precise circle, a cromlech. They placed lintels across the tops, creating gateways. Stonehenge is many things, a temple, a burial ground, but fundamentally, it is a giant, fossilized calendar. It is a clock for the year. Let us stand inside the circle on the most important morning of their year, the midsummer solstice, the longest day. The tribe gathers in the pre-dawn darkness. The air is cold and damp. There is a hush of anticipation, perhaps of fear. They look towards the northeast, through the arches of the great stone circle, towards a single, outlying stone called the heelstone. The sky lightens. The birds begin to sing. And then the sun peaks above the horizon. If the builders have done their work correctly, if the alignment is true, the first ray of the sun will rise directly over the tip of the heelstone. It will shoot like a laser beam through the avenue, pass between the great uprights of the circle, and strike the very center of the monument, the altar stone. In that moment, the light is trapped. The sun is aligned. The chaos of the universe is brought into order. It was a moment of profound reassurance. It meant that the cycle was holding, that the gods were still in their heavens, that the seasons would turn. Stonehenge stands as a monument to humanity's need to anchor itself in time, to place a marker in the chaos and say, "Here, this is the moment, we know where we are." For thousands of years, these were our clocks, the shadow on the sand, the star on the horizon, the stone aligned with the dawn. They were majestic, they were grand, but they were also capricious. A sundial is a wonderful instrument until a cloud passes over the sun. Then time vanishes. A sundial is useless at night. And there was a deeper problem. The hours shown by a sundial were not fixed. In the ancient world, the day was divided into 12 hours of light and 12 hours of darkness. But in summer, the daylight is long, so a summer hour was long. In winter, the daylight is short, so a winter hour was short, sometimes only 45 minutes by our modern reckoning. Time was elastic. It stretched and shrank. It breathed with the seasons. It was temporary time. Life was lived in accordance with this elasticity. You worked longer in the summer because the hours were longer. You slept longer in the winter because the nights were deeper. We were flexible inhabitants of a flexible time. But as civilization grew more complex, as armies needed to march, as merchants needed to meet, as lawyers needed to time their speeches in court, this elasticity became a problem. People began to crave a time that was separate from the whims of the weather, a time that did not disappear when the sun went down, a time that was steady, constant, and reliable. They wanted to capture time and bring it indoors. They wanted to turn the flow of the universe into the flow of something they could control. And so, they turned away from the sky and looked down at the earth. They looked at water, and they looked at sand. The age of the natural clock was ending. The age of the artificial flow was about to begin. Imagine a courtroom in ancient Athens. It is a hot, crowded place. An orator stands to speak, defending himself against a charge of corruption. He is eloquent, passionate, and perhaps a little long-winded. In a world without mechanical clocks, how do you ensure fairness? How do you stop a man from speaking until the sun goes down? You give him a specific amount of time, not measured in minutes, but in water. Sitting on a pedestal is a large clay vessel, filled to the brim. At the bottom is a tiny hole, stopped with a plug. When the orator begins to speak, a clerk pulls the plug. A thin, steady stream of water begins to hiss into a bowl below. This is the clepsydra. The name comes from the Greek, kleptein, to steal, and hydor, water, the water thief. It steals the water away, drop by drop, just as time steals our moments. The orator glances nervously at the vessel. He can see the water level dropping. He can hear the trickle. He knows that when the vessel is empty, his time is up. His fate hangs not just on his words, but on the flow of liquid. This simple device solved the great problem of the sundial. It worked indoors, and it worked at night. It made time portable. You could carry a bucket of time from one room to another. But the ancients were not content with simple buckets. They wanted to make water time as precise as celestial time. They encountered a problem of physics. As the vessel empties, the pressure decreases. The stream of water, strong at first, becomes a weak trickle at the end. The flow is not constant. So, the engineers of Alexandria and China devised ingenious solutions. They created vessels with sloping sides, shaped like a flower pot, wider at the top and narrower at the bottom, to compensate for the drop in pressure. They created inflow clocks, where water dripped into a vessel containing a float. As the water level rose at a steady rate, the float would rise, pointing a stick at markings on the side, indicating the hour. These were the first machines where time was displayed, not just experienced. Imagine sitting in a quiet room with one of these devices. The only sound is the rhythmic, hypnotic drip, drip, drip of water. It is a sound of immense peace, but also of relentless progression. It is the sound of time passing, audible and inescapable. The pinnacle of this water-driven technology stood in the heart of Athens, the Tower of the Winds. It still stands today, an octagonal marble tower that was, in effect, the world's first meteorological station and public clock tower. Inside, powered by water from the sacred spring on the Acropolis, was a massive, complex clepsydra. This was not a simple pot. It was a monumental engine. Water flowed from a large reservoir into a smaller tank, regulated by floats and valves to ensure a perfectly constant pressure. This steady flow raised a float, which was connected by a chain to a mechanism that turned a disc. Think about that for a moment. It turned a disc. This was a revolutionary leap. For the first time, the linear flow of water was converted into rotational motion. The movement of the heavens, the rotation of the stars, was being mimicked by a machine on Earth. This disk would show the position of the sun and the stars, even when the sky was clouded over. It was a mechanical model of the universe, powered by a hidden river. The citizens of Athens could look at this tower and know the time, day or night, rain or shine. Time had been tamed. It had been civilized. While the Greeks were perfecting their flow, on the other side of the world, the Chinese were turning water time into an art form of spectacular complexity. Chinese emperors, the sons of heaven, had a sacred duty to maintain the calendar and announce the correct time to their subjects. A failure in timekeeping was seen as a disruption of cosmic harmony. So, they built monsters. Imagine the great water clock of the Song Dynasty scientist Su Song. It was a tower over 30 feet high. Inside was a massive water wheel, like those used in a mill. But this wheel did not turn continuously. It was a step motion. Water would pour into a bucket on the rim of the wheel. When the bucket was full, its weight would trip a lever, allowing the wheel to turn one notch. The bucket would dump its water, and the next bucket would move into place to be filled. Clunk, splash, clunk, splash. This mechanism, the water escapement, chopped the continuous flow of water into discrete digital steps. It was the ancestor of the ticking clock. And the display? It was theater. On the outside of the tower, mechanical puppets would emerge through doors at the passing of each hour. They would beat drums, ring bells, and strike gongs. Imagine standing in the Imperial Square at midnight. The city is silent, and then, from the great tower, a mechanical figure emerges, bathed in moonlight, and strikes a gong. Guong. It was a message from the Emperor, delivered by water and wood. I control the river. I control the time. All is well. Water is wonderful, but it has enemies. It evaporates in the heat. It freezes in the cold. It sloshes on a moving ship. For sailors navigating the rolling seas or monks in freezing northern monasteries, water clocks were useless. They needed something dry, something that flowed like liquid but was solid as stone. They turned to sand. The hourglass. It is the most iconic symbol of time we possess, the shape of the figure 8, the two glass bulbs connected by a narrow waist. It is a marvel of simplicity. Sand does not freeze, it does not evaporate, and most remarkably, thanks to the physics of granular flow, sand runs at a constant rate, regardless of the pressure from above. Whether the top bulb is full or nearly empty, the sand trickles through the waste at exactly the same speed. It was the perfect timer for the rough and tumble world. Sailors used small, 30-minute sand glasses to time their watches on deck. "Turn the glass," the captain would shout, and the ship's bell would be rung. The rhythm of life at sea was governed by the turning of the glass. Priests used them to time their sermons. Alchemists used them to time their experiments. There is something deeply mesmerizing about watching an hourglass. Focus your mind on it now. The top bulb represents the future, full of potential, waiting to happen. The bottom bulb represents the past accumulating, settled, unchangeable. And the tiny, narrow neck, the single grain falling through at this very instant, that is the present. It is the only moment that actually exists, the now. It is fleeting, it is fragile, a single grain of sand, and then it is gone, falling into the heap of the past. To watch an hourglass is to meditate on the nature of existence. It is a visual mantra, flowing, falling, settling. Water and sand. They served us well for centuries. They allowed us to bring time indoors, to measure speeches, watches, and sermons. But they were still approximations. You had to turn the glass the moment it ran out, or you lost time. You had to refill the water vessel constantly. And crucially, they were not clocks in the sense we know today. They were timers. They measured a duration. 30 minutes have passed, but they could not tell you. It is 3 p.m. without being constantly reset against the sun. They were disconnected from the day. They ran on their own, private time. The world needed a machine that could run forever, a machine that could lock itself to the rotation of the earth and never let go, a machine that didn't just flow, but counted. The impulse for this machine would come from an unexpected place, not from kings or merchants, but from men who had turned their backs on the world, men who lived in silence in the cold stone cells of monasteries. they needed to wake up in the dark, and for that, they needed a bell. Let us leave the bustling markets of Athens and the grand courts of China. Let us travel forward in time, but inward in spirit. We arrive in Europe in the deep Middle Ages, the 11th century. The world outside is chaotic. Feudal lords battle for territory. Famine stalks the land. Life is short and brutal. But here, hidden away in a remote valley, surrounded by thick forests, or perched on a craggy rock, is an island of order, a monastery. It is a fortress of stone, but its walls are built not to keep armies out, but to keep the world out, to keep the noise, the temptation, and the chaos of time at bay. Inside these walls lived men, Benedictine monks, who had made a radical choice. They had chosen to trade their freedom for structure. They had chosen to live a life dedicated entirely to the service of God. And to serve God properly, they believed they needed to conquer time itself. Imagine the life of a novice monk. His world is defined by stone, silence, and flickering candlelight. The air smells of beeswax, incense, and cold, damp earth. His life is governed by a document written centuries before, the Rule of Saint Benedict. This rule was strict. It declared that idleness was the enemy of the soul. Every moment of the day had to be accounted for. Every hour had a purpose. There was a time for labor in the fields, a time for copying manuscripts in the scriptorium, a time for eating, and a time for sleeping. But most importantly, there was the Opus Dei, the work of God, the prayer. Saint Benedict commanded that the monks must gather in the church to pray 7 times during the day and once during the night. These gatherings were called the canonical hours: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. These were not random times. They were the spiritual pillars that held up the day. If a monk missed an hour, the structure of the prayer was broken. The connection to God was interrupted. So, the entire monastery functioned like a giant living clock. The monks were the gears, turning in a ceaseless cycle of devotion. But there was a problem. A terrifying, practical problem that haunted the sleep of the abbot. The problem was the night. The most important prayer of all was matins, the night vigil. It had to be performed in the deepest part of the darkness, long before dawn, usually around 2 or 3 a.m. Imagine the responsibility of the monk assigned to be the sacristan, the timekeeper. While his brothers sleep in the dormitory, wrapped in their rough wool blankets, he must stay awake, or even harder, he must wake up at exactly the right moment. But how? There is no sun to cast a shadow. The water clock, the clepsydra, might freeze in the bitter winter cold of the stone church. The viscosity of the water changes with temperature, making it run slow or fast. The sand glass runs out too quickly and must be turned constantly. If he nods off for even a few minutes, the count is lost. He might try to watch the stars, but what if it is cloudy? What if a storm rages outside? He is alone in the dark, wrestling with the uncertainty of time. If he wakes the brothers too early, they will be exhausted for the next day's labor, their bodies weak. If he wakes them too late, the dawn will arrive before the prayers are finished, and the sacred order of the universe will be violated. It was a sin, a failure of duty. The pressure was immense. Legend tells of monks who would drink enormous quantities of water before bed, relying on the pressure of their own bladders to wake them in the night, a desperate biological alarm clock. Others would recite long, repetitive psalms, estimating the time by the number of verses they could speak. But these were imperfect solutions. The monastery needed something better. They needed a machine that could see in the dark. A machine that didn't just measure a duration, but could announce a moment. They needed a voice. The word clock comes from the Latin word clocca. It does not mean time. It means bell. For the medieval monk, the definition of a clock was a mechanism designed to ring a bell. The face, the hands, the numbers, these things we consider essential, were irrelevant. They didn't need to see time. They needed to hear it. Sometime in the late 13th century, somewhere in a monastery in England or northern Italy, an unknown genius, almost certainly a monk with a talent for blacksmithing, made a breakthrough. He realized that the old systems of water and sand were fundamentally flawed because they relied on the continuous flow of matter. He envisioned a new system, a system based on tension and release. He built a frame of iron. He wound a heavy rope around a drum. At the end of the rope, he tied a heavy stone weight. Gravity pulled the stone down. This force wanted to spin the drum. If left alone, the drum would spin wildly, the rope would unspool in seconds, and the stone would crash to the floor. All the energy would be released in a chaotic burst. The genius lay in stopping this fall, and then allowing it to continue, and then stopping it again. He invented the escapement, the verge and foliate. Picture a vertical rod, the verge, with two small metal flags or pallets on it. This rod stands in front of a toothed wheel, the crown wheel. Across the top of the rod sits a horizontal bar, the foliate, with small weights on either end. As the weight pulls the wheel, a tooth catches on the top pallet. The wheel is locked, tick, but the pressure of the wheel pushes the pallet aside, causing the vertical rod and the horizontal bar to twist. The wheel escapes, it turns, but only for a fraction of a second, because as the rod twists, the bottom pallet swings into place and catches a tooth on the bottom of the wheel. The wheel is locked again, taut. The momentum of the weighted bar twists it back the other way, releasing the bottom tooth, but catching the top one again. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The chaotic force of gravity was tamed. It was chopped up into precise, equal, rhythmic beats. The heavy stone weight, instead of crashing down, would descend slowly, inch by inch, over the course of 24 hours. And at a specific point in its descent, the mechanism could trip a lever and release a hammer to strike a bell. Clang. In the dead of night, in the cold silence of the monastery, that mechanical sound rang out. It was a sound that had never been heard on earth before. It was not the sound of nature. It was the sound of a machine imposing its will on the universe. The monks rose from their beds. The prayers could begin. The problem was solved. For a while, this technology remained a secret of the church. hidden in bell towers and sacristies. But a sound as powerful as a bell cannot be contained. The towns and cities of Europe were growing. A new class of people, merchants, craftsmen, weavers, blacksmiths, was rising. They lived by a different rhythm than the monks. They didn't care about matins or vespers. They cared about the start of the market, the end of the trading day, the time to open the gates, the time to extinguish fires. They lived by merchants' time, not church's time. And they heard the bells ringing from the monasteries. They realized the power of that sound. It was a power to coordinate, to synchronize, to control a population. They wanted it for themselves. In the 14th century, a craze swept across Europe, a competition of civic pride. Every town, every city wanted a mechanical clock, not hidden inside, but mounted high on a tower in the market square for all to hear, and eventually to see. These early public clocks were massive beasts of wrought iron, forged by blacksmiths, not watchmakers. They were huge, heavy, and loud. They had no minute hands. They had no second hands. They often had no faces at all. They were just automated bells. But their impact was psychological. Before the clock, the day was a fluid thing. You worked while it was light. You stopped when it was dark. If it was cloudy, you guessed. Now, the day was rigid. At 6 a.m., the bell rang. The workday began. Everyone started at once. At 12 p.m., the bell rang, a break for food. At 6 p.m., the bell rang, tools down, curfew. The bell was a master. It commanded the city. It created a collective discipline. For the first time in history, a man could say, "I will meet you at the third hour," and it meant the exact same thing to him as it did to his friend. A synchronized society was born. Time was no longer a personal experience. It was a public utility. It belonged to the town council. There is a profound irony in this story. The mechanical clock was invented by men who wanted to leave the world behind, men who sought eternity, who wanted to dissolve their egos in the infinite rhythm of prayer. They built the machine to serve God, but the machine they built ended up creating the modern world. It created the concept of the work hour. It allowed for the coordination of factories, of armies, of transport networks. It turned time into money. The gentle, fluid time of the river and the shadow was replaced by the rigid, ticking time of the gear. We moved from living in the now to living for the next tick, the next bell, the next deadline. But sitting there, in the dark of the 14th century, listening to the slow, heavy clang of the iron bell echoing over the sleeping rooftops of a medieval city, there was also a strange beauty. It was the sound of human ingenuity shouting into the void, a declaration that we could build a device that mimicked the steady, unyielding pulse of the cosmos. We had captured the heartbeat of the universe and forged it in iron. And now that heartbeat was getting louder, faster, smaller. It was getting ready to leave the tower and enter the pocket. Let us shrink ourselves down. Let us become smaller than a mouse, smaller than a fly. Let us squeeze through the heavy oak door at the base of a great clock tower in Prague, or Strasbourg, or Wells. We are entering a world of darkness, dust, and grease. The air smells of old iron and lanolin oil. And above us, looming in the shadows like the skeleton of a giant beast, is the movement, the mechanical heart. Listen. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It is a sound so familiar to us that we forget how miraculous it is. It is the sound of energy being disciplined. Let us climb the wooden stairs, spiraling up into the mechanism to witness this discipline in action. At the very top, suspended in the darkness of the shaft, hangs the weight, a massive block of lead or stone. It wants to fall. It yearns for the earth. It contains all the potential energy needed to drive the machine for a day or a week. This energy travels down a thick rope wrapped around a wooden barrel. As the weight pulls, the barrel turns. This is the source, the prime mover. The barrel is connected to a great wheel, its rim studded with teeth. This is the great wheel. It turns slowly, majestically, once every hour. Its teeth mesh with a smaller gear, a pinion. This pinion spins faster. It is connected to another wheel, which meshes with another. We are witnessing a multiplication of motion, a train of gears. The slow, heavy power of the weight is being transformed into speed. Up and up the train we go, the wheels spinning faster and faster, lighter and lighter, until we reach the top, the escapement. Here is the frantic, twitching brain of the machine. The verge and foliate we saw in the monastery has evolved. It is more precise now. The metal is smoother. The rhythm is tighter. Click, clack, click, clack. The pallet strikes the tooth. The tooth pushes back. The bar swings. It is a violent, metal-on-metal collision happening once every second, over and over again, 86,400 times a day, 31 million times a year. For centuries, the metal wears down, the oil dries up, the wood warps, and yet the machine beats on. This was the first time humanity built something that was meant to be continuous, to be alive in a way that no plow, no sword, no chariot ever was. To stand inside a clock tower is to stand inside a mechanical organism. It breathes, it has a pulse, and it demands to be fed with the daily ritual of winding. But the people in the square below did not see the grease and the gears. They saw the glory. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the great cities of Europe transformed the public clock from a simple timekeeper into a model of the universe. They built the astronomical clocks. Let us stand in the old town square of Prague. A crowd gathers. It is almost the hour. They look up at the southern wall of the town hall. There, embedded in the stone, is a spectacle of gold and blue. The face of the clock is not a simple circle of numbers. It is an astrolabe, a background of fixed earth and sky. Around it moves a ring representing the zodiac. A golden sun travels along this ring, showing not just the time, but the position of the sun in the ecliptic. A silver moon sphere rotates, showing the phase of the moon waxing, waning, full, or new. It was a computer, a mechanical computer built of brass and iron, calculating the movements of the heavens in real time. But the crowd is not there for the astronomy, they are there for the show. As the skeleton of death pulls the bell cord, clang, two small doors open above the clock face, and the walk of the apostles begins. One by one, small, painted wooden figures of Saint Peter and the apostles appear in the window, turn to bless the crowd, and disappear. A rooster crows. A Turk shakes his head. A miser shakes his purse. Vanity looks in a mirror. It was a moral play, a memento mori. It reminded the people below, time is passing, death is waiting. Greed and vanity are foolish. Look to the saints, look to the heavens. The clock was a teacher. It combined science, religion, and art into a single, mesmerizing performance. For a peasant traveling to the city for market day, seeing this machine for the first time must have been a religious experience. It was magic, proof that man could capture the movements of the angels and replicate them with wood and wire. It made the invisible visible. It made the abstract concept of time into a character on a stage. For a long time, this mechanical heartbeat belonged to the city. It was a communal sound. But as the craft of the locksmith and the clockmaker refined, the machine began to shrink. The heavy weights were replaced by a new power source, the coiled spring. A long, thin strip of steel, tempered to perfection, wound tightly inside a drum. As it unwound, it released energy. This meant the clock no longer had to hang on a wall or stand in a tower to allow a weight to fall. It could sit on a table. It could be carried. Time moved indoors. It entered the living room, the domestic clock. Imagine a wealthy merchant's house in Nuremberg or Augsburg in the 16th century. On the mantelpiece sits a table clock. It is a box of gilded brass engraved with intricate floral patterns. It is an object of immense luxury, costing as much as a small house. But listen to the room. Before, the home was a quiet place, filled only with the sounds of its inhabitants, voices, footsteps, the crackle of the fire. Now, there is a new presence, an intruder. Tick, 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 tick. A constant, rhythmic background noise, a reminder that time is passing, even in the privacy of one's home. The clock became a member of the family. It had a face, it had hands, it needed care. It had to be wound every day, cleaned, regulated, and in return, it organized the household. Meals were served on time, prayers were said on time, lessons began on time. The soft time of the sun and the stomach was replaced by the hard time of the dial. We began to eat, not when we were hungry, but when the clock said it was noon. We began to sleep, not when we were tired, but when the clock said it was night. We were slowly, imperceptibly surrendering our biological rhythms to the mechanical rhythm of the spring and the gear. We were becoming synchronized. Yet, these early clocks were still unruly creatures. They were beautiful, but inaccurate. They could gain or lose 15 minutes a day, The friction of the gears, the changing tension of the spring, the temperature of the room, everything affected them. They had only an hour hand, because a minute hand would have been a lie. You could not trust them to the minute. The world needed a heartbeat that was steady, a rhythm that did not waver. The answer came from a chandelier swinging in a cathedral in Pisa, or so the story goes. A young Galileo Galilei watched a lamp swinging gently in the draught. He timed its swings with his own pulse. He noticed something remarkable. Whether the lamp swung in a wide arc or a tiny arc, the time it took to complete one swing was exactly the same. Isochronism, the constant time, the pendulum. It took another genius, the Dutch scientist Christian Huygens, to take this discovery and trap it inside a clock. In 1656, the first pendulum clock was built. It was a revolution in precision. Instead of the frantic, twitching foliot, there was now a long, weighted rod, swinging with a slow, majestic, hypnotic rhythm. Swaying, talk, swaying, talk. The error rate dropped from 15 minutes a day to 15 seconds. Suddenly, the minute hand became possible. It appeared on clock faces everywhere. The hour was divided into 60 reliable slices. Then, the second hand appeared. The minute was divided into 60 fleeting moments. Time was being chopped finer and finer. The grandfather clock, the long case clock, was born to house this long pendulum. It stood in the hallway like a sentinel, its slow, heavy heartbeat echoing through the house. It was the voice of authority, the standard against which all life was measured. Humanity had finally built a machine that could match the regularity of the stars. We had captured the steady pulse of gravity itself. This new precision did more than just organize our days. It changed how we thought about the universe. Philosophers and scientists looked at the heavens, the reliable orbits of the planets, the predictable cycles of the stars, and they looked at their new, precise machines, and they saw a mirror image. They began to imagine the universe itself as a giant clock. God was the great clockmaker. He had wound up the mainspring of the cosmos at the moment of creation, set the pendulum swinging, and now watched it run according to perfect, immutable mechanical laws. There was no chaos. There was only mechanism. The clockwork universe. It was a comforting thought. It meant the world was rational. It was understandable. It was predictable. If you could understand the gears, gravity, motion, force, you could understand the mind of God. The ticking of the clock in the hallway was a small echo of the music of the spheres. And so, as the 17th century turned into the 18th, Europe was a continent entranced by the machine. We built automata mechanical dolls that could write, play music, or draw, marveling at our ability to mimic life with gears. We were the masters of the machine. But there was one place where the pendulum refused to swing, one place where the clockwork universe fell apart, one frontier that defied the mechanical heartbeat: the sea. You cannot use a pendulum on a rocking ship. It will stumble, it will stop, and without a clock, a ship at sea is lost in longitude. It knows how far north or south it is, but not how far east or west. Ships were crashing onto rocks. Fleets were lost. thousands of sailors drowned. The greatest scientific challenge of the age was not theoretical. It was practical. It was desperate. How do you carry time across the ocean? The answer would come not from a scientist, but from a carpenter, and it would require a machine of impossible beauty. Let us step aboard a British warship in the year 1707, the HMS Association. It is night. The sea is rough. The sky is overcast. The admiral, Sir Cloudesley Shovel, stands on the quarterdeck. He is a brave man, a veteran of many battles, but tonight he is facing an enemy he cannot fight with cannons. He is lost. He knows his latitude. Since ancient times, sailors could measure their distance north or south of the equator by measuring the height of the sun at noon or the North Star at night. Latitude is written in the sky. But longitude? The distance east or west. The sky tells you nothing. As the earth rotates, the stars march across the sky from east to west. They look the same in London as they do in the Caribbean. They just appear at different times. To know where you are east to west, you need to know two things. What time is it here, on the ship? This is easy. Check the sun at noon. And what time is it back home, in London, at that exact same moment? The difference in time tells you the distance. Since the Earth turns 15 degrees every hour, if it is noon on your ship but 1 p.m. in London, you are 15 degrees west. It is a simple equation. Time equals distance. But how do you carry the time of London with you on a voyage that lasts months? There were no radio signals, no GPS, no internet. You needed a clock. But in 1707, there was no clock on Earth that could survive the sea. The pendulum clocks that kept perfect time in a quiet London study were useless on a heaving deck. The motion of the waves disrupted the swing. The humidity rusted the gears. The changes in temperature from the freezing North Atlantic to the sweltering tropics made the metal expand and contract, ruining the accuracy. So, Admiral Shovel did what all sailors did. He guessed. He used dead reckoning, estimating speed with a log tied to a rope and direction with a compass. But guesses compound errors. On that foggy night in 1707, the admiral believed he was safe in the open ocean. He was wrong. His fleet crashed onto the rocks of the Scilly Isles just off the coast of England. 4 ships were lost. 2,000 men drowned. It was one of the worst maritime disasters in British history, and it happened simply because they did not know the time. The disaster shocked the nation. Parliament passed the Longitude Act of 1714. They offered a prize, a king's ransom, £20,000, millions of dollars today, to anyone who could solve the problem of longitude. The greatest scientific minds of the age, Sir Isaac Newton, Edmund Halley, attacked the problem. They looked to the stars. They believed the answer lay in the clock of heaven, the complex movements of the moon relative to the stars. It was called the lunar distance method. It was elegant. It was astronomical. It was theoretical. And it was impossibly difficult for a sailor on a rolling deck to calculate. But in a small village in Yorkshire, a carpenter named John Harrison had a different idea. He was a man of humble birth. He had no formal education. He was not an astronomer. He worked with wood. But he understood something the scientists did not. He understood that the problem wasn't the stars. The problem was friction. The problem was temperature. He believed he could build a machine, a mechanical clock that would keep perfect time anywhere on Earth. The establishment mocked him. Newton declared that a mechanical watch could never be accurate enough. Harrison ignored them. He spent his life, not years, but decades, locked in a battle with physics. He built H1, a massive, gleaming beast of brass and wood, weighing 75 pounds. It looked like a strange sea creature. Instead of a pendulum, it used 2 dumbbells connected by springs, swinging in opposition to cancel out the motion of the ship. It worked better than anything before it, but it wasn't good enough. He built H2, he built H3, each one a masterpiece of engineering, solving problems of expansion and lubrication that no one had even thought of. He invented the bimetallic strip, a sandwich of brass and steel that curled when heated, automatically adjusting the clock to compensate for temperature. He invented the caged roller bearing to reduce friction. He was inventing modern mechanical engineering alone in his workshop. Then, in 1759, after 30 years of labor, an old man now, Harrison unveiled his masterpiece, H4. The Board of Longitude expected another giant machine. Instead, Harrison placed a small object on the table. It was 5 inches across. It looked like a large silver pocket watch. The scientists were incredulous. This toy? This trinket? This is supposed to guide the Royal Navy? But inside that silver case lay the most complex, condensed, and beautiful mechanism human hands had ever made. It beat with a rapid, urgent rhythm, tick, 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 5 times a second. It used a high-frequency balance wheel, spinning back and forth on a hairspring made of tempered steel. It was a heart that beat so fast the motion of the ship couldn't disturb it. Inside, he used diamonds and rubies for the bearings. He used oil that wouldn't freeze. It was the first true marine chronometer. In 1761, H4 was put to the test. It was placed aboard the HMS Deptford for a voyage to Jamaica. For 81 days, the ship battered through Atlantic storms and roasted in the Caribbean sun. When they arrived in Jamaica, the astronomers took their measurements. H4 had lost 5 seconds. 5 seconds in 3 months. It was an accuracy that bordered on the miraculous. It meant the ship's position could be calculated to within 1 mile. Harrison had done the impossible. He had trapped time in a box. He had made it portable. He had conquered the longitude. The Board of Longitude, dominated by astronomers who still favored the lunar method, refused to believe it. They claimed it was a fluke. They withheld the prize. They forced the old man to hand over his beloved machine to be dismantled and inspected by his rivals. It took the intervention of King George III himself to finally secure Harrison his reward and recognition. just before he died. But the revolution had already begun. Armed with copies of Harrison's chronometer, a new generation of explorers set sail. Captain James Cook took a replica of H4 on his voyages to the Pacific. With this trusty friend, as he called it, Cook was able to do what no one before him could. He didn't just find islands, he placed them on the map. He charted the coast of New Zealand. He mapped the eastern coast of Australia. He navigated the islands of Polynesia with pinpoint accuracy. The blank spaces on the map the terra incognita began to fill in. The chronometer turned the ocean from a terrifying void into a grid, a navigable, knowable space. Trade routes became efficient. Navies could coordinate global maneuvers. The British Empire and the modern global economy was built on the foundation of accurate timekeeping at sea. Time had ceased to be a local affair. There was no longer London time and Jamaica time existing in isolation. There was now a relationship between them, a global network of synchronized moments. And as the technology of the chronometer was refined and miniaturized, it began to seep back onto land. The rich began to carry watches, not the inaccurate ornaments of the past, but precise instruments. A man could pull a watch from his waistcoat pocket, flip open the gold lid, and see the exact minute. He carried his own time. He was no longer dependent on the town clock or the church bell. He was independent. This was a psychological shift. The pocket watch became a symbol of the modern man, punctual, efficient, in control of his own destiny. Railways were built, connecting cities, and because trains had to run on a schedule to avoid collisions, time had to be standardized. In the 19th century, the confusion of every town having its own local noon was abolished. Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, was established. The world was divided into time zones. The entire planet was synchronized to a single mechanical heartbeat originating from the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, London. The fluid, natural time of the sun was gone forever. We now lived in standard time, a time that was the same for everyone, everywhere, a time that marched forward, relentless and precise, carried in the pockets of millions of people. The transformation was complete. We had moved from looking at the vast, slow sky to looking at a small, ticking machine in the palm of our hand. We have traveled a long way from the shadow on the sand, from the clepsydra dripping in the Athenian court to the heavy iron bells of the monastery, from the pendulum swinging in the hallway to the chronometer rocking on the high seas. And now, we arrive at the most intimate stage of all. Look at your own wrist, or imagine the watch that your grandfather wore. For centuries, the watch was a pocket object, a hidden treasure. But the chaos of the First World War changed that. Soldiers in the muddy trenches needed to coordinate attacks with split-second precision. Fumbling for a pocket watch was too slow, too dangerous. So, they strapped time to their wrists, the trench watch. After the war, this habit stuck. Time moved from the pocket to the pulse. It was a symbolic union. The mechanical heartbeat of the machine was now placed directly over the biological heartbeat of the human. The wristwatch became the defining accessory of the 20th century. It was a badge of modernity. It meant you were part of the synchronized world. You caught trains. You punched clocks. You met deadlines. We became a species obsessed with the now. With a glance at the wrist, we could slice reality into hours, minutes, and seconds. But even the ticking of a mechanical watch, with its intricate springs and gears, was not precise enough for the hunger of the modern world. We wanted more. We wanted to split the second itself. In the middle of the 20th century, a new heartbeat was discovered, not in a swinging pendulum, but in a crystal of quartz. Scientists found that if you apply electricity to a quartz crystal, it vibrates. It doesn't just shake. It resonates at a breathtakingly precise frequency, 32,768 times a second. This was a new kind of rhythm. It was not mechanical. It was piezoelectric. It was the rhythm of matter itself. The quartz revolution swept the world. The ticking gear was replaced by the silent, vibrating crystal and the digital display. Watches became cheap, rugged, and accurate to within a few seconds a year. Time was no longer a luxury. It was a commodity. It was everywhere. On our microwaves, our ovens, our VCRs, our dashboards. We surrounded ourselves with blinking numbers. We banished the uncertainty of time. There was no more guessing, no more about noon. It was 12 hours and 1 second. We gained precision, but perhaps we lost something else. We lost the visible flow, the shadow moving across the dial, the sand falling through the glass, the hands sweeping around the face. Time became a set of digits, a cold, blinking fact. But even quartz was not enough for the age of the internet and space travel. To navigate a spacecraft to Mars, or to synchronize the GPS satellites that guide our cars, we need precision that defies human comprehension. We needed a clock that would not lose a second in a million years. So we looked deeper, deeper than the crystal. We looked into the atom, the atomic clock. It does not measure the swing of a pendulum or the vibration of a quartz. It measures the oscillation of electrons in a cesium atom. 9,192,631,770 times a second. That number is the official definition of a second. Time is no longer defined by the rotation of the Earth or the movement of the Sunday. The Earth is wobbly. It slows down and speeds up. It is an imperfect timekeeper. So, we detached time from nature. We defined it by the unchangeable laws of quantum physics. Universal Coordinated Time, UTC. It is a time generated in sterile laboratories, averaged out by supercomputers, and beamed around the world. It is the invisible grid that holds our civilization together. The internet, the stock market, the power grid, they all dance to the beat of the atom. We have mastered time. We have sliced it into nanoseconds. We have conquered the fourth dimension. And yet, as we lie here tonight, in the quiet of our rooms, do we feel like masters? Or Do we feel like servants? We have built the most precise clocks in the universe, but we seem to have less time than ever before. The ancient Egyptian peasant, watching the shadow on the sand, had a connection to the day that we have lost. He knew when to work and when to rest. We carry our clocks in our pockets, our phones, and they demand our attention constantly. They buzz, they beep, they notify. We are always on time, but are we ever in the moment? The Greeks had 2 words for time: chronos, the time of the clock; sequential, measuring, relentless, the time that eats its children; and kairos, the time of the moment, the opportune time, the time when you are lost in a sunset, or a piece of music, or a dream, the time that feels infinite. We have become masters of chronos, but we are starving for kairos. So tonight, let us put chronos away. Let us turn off the alarm. Let us ignore the digits. Let us return to the river. Close your eyes. Listen to your own breath, in and out. Listen to your own heart, lub-dub, lub-dub. These are the original clocks, the biological rhythms that have been beating since life began. They do not tick, they flow. Think of the sun, now hidden on the other side of the world, silently pouring its light onto vast oceans and sleeping continents. Think of the moon, pulling the tides in a slow, heavy breath. Think of the stars, the great, silent watchers, wheeling overhead in their million-year cycles. The mechanical tick is just a tiny, frantic scratching on the surface of this deep, silent ocean. The ocean is still there. It is waiting for you. It is the place where time does not matter, the place where the past and the future dissolve, and there is only the peaceful, eternal now. We have journeyed from the obelisks of Egypt to the atomic labs of the modern world. We have seen how humanity has strived for 5,000 years to capture the wind, the water, and the stars in a box. It is a story of ingenuity, of brilliance, and of a beautiful, desperate need to understand our place in the universe. But the journey ends here, in the quiet. The clock on the wall may keep ticking, but you do not need to listen. You are free from the count. You are free from the measure. Thank you for traveling down this river of time with us tonight. It has been a privilege to share these stories with you. If you have found a moment of stillness in this long history, a simple like is a quiet way to say thank you, and it helps our stories reach others in search of rest. And if you wish to join us for future journeys into the past, please subscribe. We are grateful for every companion on this path. But now, let the history fade. Let the gears stop turning. Let the pendulum come to rest. Let the sand settle in the glass. There is no time here, only peace. Drift away on the invisible river. May your rest be timeless, and your sleep deep. Good night.